In the heart of the Igbo village of Ogwugwu, Onyeka is born with an extraordinary gift of invisibility, a secret his mother wants him to use wisely. When his best friend and other villagers are captured by a cruel king, Onyeka must choose between safety and bravery, setting the stage for a daring rescue that could change everything. As the shadows of war and darker threats loom, Onyeka learns that true strength lies not just in his powers but in the unity and courage of his people. With each challenge, he faces enemies far beyond his imagination, risking everything to protect those he loves. Will Onyeka's gift save his people, or will it cost him everything? Once upon a time, in the quiet Igbo village of Ogwugwu, there lived a young boy named Onyeka. Onyeka was not like other children. He was born with a secret gift. He could turn invisible. His mother Adaeze, a wise and loving woman, told him to keep his gift hidden. "Onyeka, my son," she said one evening as they sat under the moonlight sky. "This gift is powerful, but not everyone will understand it. Use it only to help others, never for mischief." Onyeka listened to his mother and kept his secret safe. He would practice his invisibility in the forest, sleeping between the trees unseen, feeling the thrill of his power but always remembering his mother's words. In the grand palace of the neighboring village of Ukpoma, a wicked king named Eze Odili lived far away. Eze Odili was a cruel man who cared only for his riches and power. He taxed his people heavily, forcing them to give up their harvest and livestock. Anyone who disobeyed him was thrown into the dark cold prison beneath the palace. One day, news reached Ogwugwu that Eze Odili had captured a group of villagers who had refused to pay his unfair taxes. Among them was Chima, Onyeka's best friend. When Onyeka heard this, his heart burned with anger and sadness. He couldn't let his friend suffer in that terrible place. But what could a young boy do against a powerful king? That night, Onyeka couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, thinking about Chima and the other villagers. Finally, he sat up and whispered to himself, "I have to help them. I have my gift. Maybe I can use it to set them free." The next morning, Onyeka told his mother about his plan. Adaeze's eyes filled with worry. "My son, Eze Odili is dangerous. Promise me you'll be careful." Onyeka hugged his mother tightly. "I promise, Mama. I'll come back." Onyeka set out for Ukpoma, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The journey was long, and the sun beat down on him as he walked through the dusty paths and thick forest. But he didn't stop. He had a mission. When he reached the palace, Onyeka hid behind a tree and watched the guards at the gate. They were tall and fierce, holding long spears and wearing scowls on their faces. Onyeka took a deep breath and whispered, "It's time." He closed his eyes and focused, feeling the familiar tingle spread through his body. When he opened his eyes, he was invisible. Quietly, he slipped past the guards and into the palace. The inside of the palace was grand, with high ceilings and golden decorations. Onyeka moved silently through the halls, searching for the prison. Finally, he found a staircase that led down to a dark underground prison. The air was heavy and the sound of dripping water echoed around him. In the dim light, Onyeka saw Chima and the other villagers locked in iron cages. Chima's face lit up with hope when he saw the cage door open by itself. "Onyeka. Is that you?" he whispered. "Yes, it's me," Onyeka replied, his voice low but firm. "I'm here to get you out." One by one, Onyeka unlocked the cages, using keys he had taken from a sleeping guard. The villagers followed him quietly, their hearts racing. But as they reached the stairs, a loud voice boomed behind them. "Stop right there." It was Eze Odili. He stood at the top of the stairs, his eyes blazing with fury. Guards surrounded him, their spears pointed at the group. Onyeka's mind raced. He had to protect the villagers. He turned invisible again, confusing the guards as they tried to figure out where he had gone. With quick thinking, he grabbed a stick and began knocking over torches and vases, creating complete disorder and confusion. "What kind of magic is this?" Eze Odili roared, his voice shaking with fear and anger. Taking advantage of the confusion, Onyeka led the villagers out of the dark underground prison. They ran as fast as they could, their hearts pounding with both fear and relief. When they finally reached the safety of the forest, they stopped to catch their breath. Chima turned to Onyeka, tears in his eyes. "You saved us. How can we ever thank you?" Onyeka smiled, his face glowing with pride. "That's what friends are for." But as they made their way back to Ogwugwu, Onyeka couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Eze Odili wouldn't let this humiliation go unanswered. He would come for revenge, and Onyeka knew he had to be ready. Back in Ogwugwu, the villagers celebrated their return, but Adaeze saw the worry in her son's eyes. She placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "My son, you have a brave heart. But remember, true strength comes not just from your gift, but from the wisdom to use it wisely." Onyeka nodded, determination shining in his eyes. He knew the battle was only beginning, but he was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were quiet, but a sense of unease lingered in the air. Onyeka spent his time helping the villagers rebuild their lives, but he also prepared for what he knew was coming. He practiced his invisibility, learning to stay hidden for longer periods and move silently even on dry leaves. He crafted simple traps from branches and vines, scattering them around the village as a first line of defense. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, a loud horn echoed across Ogwugwu. The villagers froze, their eyes wide with fear. Onyeka ran to the edge of the village and saw a line of soldiers marching toward them. At the front of the group was Eze Odili, riding a black horse and wearing a golden crown that glinted in the fading sunlight. Eze Odili raised his hand, and the soldier stopped. His voice boomed across the village. "People of Ogwugwu, you have defied me. You have stolen what belongs to me. Now you will pay the price." The villagers gathered in the square, their faces pale with fear. Onyeka stood in front with his hands tightly closed into fists. "You can't harm these people," he called out. "They've done nothing wrong." Eze Odili laughed a cold, cruel sound. "And who will stop me?" "A young boy." Onyeka stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Maybe I'm just a boy, but I'm not afraid of you." Eze Odili's eyes narrowed. "Then let us see how brave you are." He motioned to his soldiers, who began advancing toward the villagers. Onyeka took a deep breath and turned invisible. The soldiers paused, looking around, not sure of what to do. "Where did he go?" one of them quietly said. From the shadows, Onyeka jumped into action. He used his traps to trip the soldiers, sending them tumbling to the ground. He grabbed sticks and rocks, hurling them at the soldiers to create more confusion. The villagers, inspired by his courage, began to fight back using farming tools and whatever they could find. Eze Odili watched in disbelief as his army lost strength. "This is impossible," he shouted. He turned his horse to flee, but Onyeka wasn't about to let him escape. He ran after the king, dodging through the confusion, and leaped onto the back of the horse. Grabbing the straps used to control the horse, he turned the horse around and led it back toward the village square. The villagers cheered as Onyeka dragged Eze Odili off the horse and onto the ground. The once mighty king looked up at the boy with fear in his eyes. "Please, spare me," he begged. Onyeka stood tall, his voice steady. "Leave this place and never return. If you ever harm these people again, you'll answer to me." Eze Odili scrambled to his feet and ran, his soldiers following close behind. The villagers erupted into cheers, lifting Onyeka onto their shoulders. But Onyeka's mother, Adaeze, watched from the crowd with a knowing look. She pulled him aside after the celebrations and said, "My son, you've won today, but there will always be more battles. Stay humble, stay wise, and remember the strength of your heart." Onyeka nodded, her words sinking deep into his soul. The village was safe for now, but he knew his journey was far from over. The celebrations in Ogwugwu lasted through the night with music, dancing, and the warmth of community filling the air. Onyeka felt the love and gratitude of his people, but deep within, he couldn't shake the feeling that the peace they had won was only temporary. The world was vast and many still sought to harm others for power and greed. Eze Odili was only one of many dangers that hid beyond the horizon. As the village quieted down, Onyeka sat by the river, his legs dangling in the cool water. His mind raced with questions. Was his gift truly a blessing or was it a curse? Could he always keep the balance between using it for good and avoiding temptation? Would he be strong enough when faced with the next challenge? Adaeze appeared beside him, her gentle presence calming his restless thoughts. She sat down beside him, the moonlight reflecting in her wise eyes. My son, you are not alone. Your heart has always been pure and the strength you possess is not just in your gift but in your courage and wisdom. Onyeka turned to her, searching her face for answers. But Mama, what if I'm not enough? What if the next time, the danger is greater, and I can't protect everyone? Adaeze smiled softly and placed a hand on his shoulder. The world is full of trials, but remember this, true strength comes not from avoiding battles, but from knowing when to fight and when to show mercy. You do not need to face everything alone, and sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to ask for help when the time comes. Onyeka nodded, his heart feeling lighter. He had always been a solitary figure, preferring to handle his challenges on his own, but maybe his mother was right. Maybe there was more power in unity and wisdom than in individual strength alone. The next morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Onyeka knew it was time to prepare for whatever came next. He couldn't remain idle, waiting for danger to arrive. He would train the villagers in self-defense, teach them the value of unity and strength in numbers, and help them build a community that could stand strong against any threat. And if the time ever came when he needed to use his gift again, he would be ready, but he would use it with the wisdom his mother had imparted. Word of Onyeka's bravery had spread beyond the village, reaching other villages in the region. Soon, travelers came to Ogwugwu from distant lands, seeking Onyeka's counsel and protection. They too had been affected by tyrants and injustice, and they believed Onyeka with his gift and courage could be the key to freeing them from their oppressors. One day, a man named Okoro arrived from the distant village of Okochi. He was tall with a stern face and eyes filled with determination. He carried an ancient-looking staff, decorated with symbols of strength and protection. He bowed to Onyeka and said, "I have heard of your bravery, young one. I have come to seek your help. Our village is under threat from a band of raiders who have been terrorizing the land. They are ruthless and many of our people have already fallen." Onyeka felt a sense of duty rise within him. He had faced Eze Odili, but this was something different. A band of raiders was unpredictable, and they could strike at any moment. However, he knew that helping Okoro could strengthen the alliance between villages and offer a chance to stop the violence before it spread further. "I will help you," Onyeka said firmly, standing tall. "But we must act quickly, and we must act wisely. I will not face this battle alone. We need to prepare, and we need to unite as one." Okoro's eyes softened with gratitude. "Your wisdom is greater than I expected from one so young. Thank you, Onyeka. Together, we will bring peace to our people." And so, Onyeka's journey continued. He traveled to Okochi with Okoro, gathering the villagers and training them to defend themselves. They built traps in the forest, sharpened their spears, and honed their skills in the art of stealth and strategy. Onyeka also shared his gift with them, teaching them the importance of invisibility and how it could be used not only as a tool of protection but as a way to gather information and confuse their enemies. As the raiders drew closer, Onyeka's heart beat with anticipation. He knew this would be the greatest challenge he had faced yet. But with the villagers of Ogwugwu and Okochi standing beside him, he felt ready. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the raiders arrived at Okochi's outskirts. They were a large group, riding on horseback, their faces hardened by years of violence. Onyeka could hear the thudding of hoofs and the crackle of torches in the distance. The villagers gathered in the trees, hidden from view, waiting for Onyeka's signal. Onyeka turned to Okoro, his voice steady. "Tonight, we fight with wisdom. We fight as one." Okoro nodded, raising his staff in the air. "For our people. For our future." As the raiders drew near, Onyeka disappeared into the shadows, his body melting into the night. The villagers moved in perfect unison, using the land to their advantage. Onyeka moved behind the raiders, unseen and unheard, and began knocking their torches into the trees, starting small fires to disorient them. The raiders panicked, stumbling over their own feet as they tried to figure out where the attacks were coming from. The villagers struck from all sides, using spears and arrows, and the raiders were thrown into confusion. But even in battle, Onyeka could hear the words of his mother echo in his mind. True strength comes not from avoiding battles, but from knowing when to fight and when to show mercy. The raiders, realizing they were overwhelmed, began to retreat. Onyeka and the villagers pressed forward, ensuring the raiders wouldn't return for some time. When the battle ended, the villagers stood victorious, but they did not celebrate with arrogance. Instead, they helped the injured and tended to the wounded with respect and care. As the sun began to rise over the peaceful village, Onyeka stood at the edge of the forest, watching the horizon. He had won another battle, but he knew the journey was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new obstacles, and new battles. But with the strength of his heart, the wisdom of his mother, and the unity of his people, Onyeka knew they would face them together. And so, his journey continued one step at a time, with the knowledge that no matter what came next, he was not alone. The victory over the raiders had brought relief to Okachi, but it didn't take long for Onyeka to realize that peace was a fleeting thing. As the villagers rebuilt their homes and celebrated the end of the raid, whispers began to spread about darker forces in the land, forces even more dangerous than the raiders. Tales of a shadowy figure known only as the Hunter of Souls had begun to circulate. This figure was said to be a powerful sorcerer who could control the minds of men and bend nature to his will. His goal was not mere conquest, but domination of the entire region. Onyeka heard the rumors while helping to restore a broken fence. A man from a neighboring village had come to speak with him, his eyes wide with fear. "Onyeka, we have to prepare. The hunter is coming. He has already taken over villages to the north. His power is growing." Onyeka's heart sank. He had fought tyrants and raiders, but this was something different. The Hunter of Souls wasn't after land or gold, he was after control of the very essence of the people. "Who is this man?" Onyeka asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "No one knows for sure. Some say he was once a powerful priest who dabbled in dark magic, while others claim he was a king who lost his mind to greed and power. All we know is that he can control the will of others, bending them to his desires. Entire villages have been turned into his puppets." Onyeka turned to face Okoro, who had been listening intently. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed with concern. "We cannot fight this alone. We need to unite every village in the region together, we stand a chance." The two men began to plan. They reached out to neighboring villages, sending messengers and gathering warriors. Onyeka, knowing that the fight would require not just strength but strategy, began to train the villagers in new ways of combat. He taught them how to resist mind control by strengthening their wills and how to fight without fear, knowing that the hunter could exploit the smallest trace of doubt or hesitation. Days passed, and the tension grew. The Hunter of Souls was drawing closer, and with each day, Onyeka's sense of urgency intensified. He had to be ready. The villagers of Ogwugwu, Okachi, and other surrounding villages had formed a loose alliance, but it was clear that this battle would be unlike any they had fought before. One night, as Onyeka sat alone by the fire, he heard a soft rustling behind him. He turned to find his mother, Adaeze, approaching with her usual calm grace. Her eyes were filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. "My son," she said softly, sitting beside him. "I see the weight of this coming battle in your eyes. I know you are worried, but remember this, true power lies not in the gift you possess, but in the strength of your heart and the wisdom you choose to follow." Onyeka smiled faintly, but the worry still lingered. "I fear I may not be enough, Mama. The hunter is unlike any enemy I have faced. His power is not something I can defeat with my invisibility alone." Adaeze placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone, Onyeka. The strength of many will overcome the power of one. Trust in your people, trust in your heart, and the wisdom you've gained. You have already proven that you can lead. Now is the time to trust that leadership and your allies." Onyeka nodded, feeling a surge of determination within him. His mother was right. This fight wasn't his alone, it was a battle for the future of all the villages in the region, and they would face it together. The next day, Onyeka and the leaders of the allied villages met at the edge of the forest. They discussed their plans, and Onyeka shared his strategy for confronting the hunter. They would need to draw him out and force him into the open where his powers would be weaker. But that would require great risk. The hunter was known to manipulate the terrain itself, using it to trap his enemies and disorient them. But with Onyeka's knowledge of stealth and the villagers' bravery, they believed they could outsmart him. The first step of the plan was to disrupt the hunter's supply lines. If they could cut off his access to resources, they could slow his advance and force him to act before he was fully prepared. Onyeka volunteered to lead this mission, knowing it would require both his skill in invisibility and the villagers. As night fell, Onyeka and a small group of trusted allies set out toward the hunter's camp. The forest was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the moonlight barely pierced through the canopy. Onyeka moved quietly, slipping between the trees like a shadow. His heart raced with both anticipation and caution. This mission could turn the tide, or it could lead them straight into the hunter's trap. As they approached the camp, they saw the glow of a fire through the trees. Onyeka signaled to his team to halt. They crouched low, watching the movement of guards around the perimeter. The hunter's camp was protected by a web of magical barriers, but Onyeka's invisibility allowed him to slip past unnoticed. He moved through the camp, sabotaging the supplies, cutting ropes, scattering food, and knocking over water barrels. But as he walked, a chilling thought crossed his mind. How could he be sure this would weaken the hunter? What if the hunter was already watching them, already aware of their presence? Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the camp, and Onyeka froze. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as a shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally across the ground. From within the darkness of the trees, a voice deep and hollow reached his ears. You think you can stop me, Onyeka? You think you can stop the inevitable? Onyeka turned, his pulse quickening. There, standing in the shadows, was the hunter of souls. His eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and his long tattered robes billowed around him like a dark cloud. He was tall, but his presence was not one of physical stature, it was an aura of malevolence that made the very air seem thick and suffocating. Onyeka stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of his courage. I don't fear you. The hunter chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the silence of the forest. You should. I have seen your heart, Onyeka. I know your doubts. I know your weaknesses. You cannot win this fight. There is no victory over me. Onyeka stood tall, his mind racing. His gift of invisibility could only get him so far against this enemy. But he had learned something vital from his battles before. True power came from within. And it was time to face that power head-on. I don't need to defeat you alone, Onyeka said, his voice unwavering. I have my people. And together, we will stop you. The hunter's eyes narrowed, and the shadows around him seemed to shift. Very well. Let us see if you can rally them in time. But know this, boy, you cannot win against what you cannot see. Onyeka's heart beat faster, but his resolve only grew stronger. It wasn't about defeating the hunter in one swift strike. It was about uniting the villages, gathering strength, and showing the world that no force of darkness could conquer the light of unity and courage. As he turned to signal his comrades, he knew the real battle was just beginning, and this time, he wouldn't face it alone. Onyeka stood tall, the weight of the battle ahead pressing on his shoulders. But with his people at his side, he knew that no darkness, no matter how powerful, could extinguish the light of unity and courage. The hunter of souls may have underestimated them, but Onyeka had learned that true strength came from within and from those who stood together. As the moonlight faded and the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Onyeka turned to his comrades, ready to lead them into the next chapter of this epic battle. The journey was far from over, but Onyeka was no longer just a boy with a gift, he was a leader, a protector, and a symbol of hope for all who dared to resist the darkness. Now, this is for you watching. Do you love this story? Would you like to see what happens next? If you're ready for part 2, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more thrilling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned, because the adventure is just beginning. Watch out for the part 2.